Hey guys, what is up? Mage here, doing another World of Tanks console gameplay commentary. Today guys, I want to talk about something that I think it doesn't get talked about as much as it used to, and that is why balance is important in World of Tanks, especially here on console. Around about 2 years ago, we had, between June and August of 2014, we had our first real serious rebalance. And basically, it was the German tank rebalance, or the attempted German tank rebalance. And basically, for those that don't know, the point of this particular patch was to mirror patch 8.8 on the PC. And for those that don't know what patch 8.8 on the PC was, basically they removed the top engines on German tanks, and they replaced them with new engines. And basically, German tanks didn't accelerate as fast. And you had instances where Wargaming basically compensated the removal of these top engines with better track traverse, and they had suspension buffs, so they had better terrain resistance. They also had better gun handling, better DPM, so on and so forth. And the point was, and I'm going to speak about German mediums here because that's where I have most of my experience. Some of this could also be applied to the German tank destroyers and heavy tanks, so please bear with me. Basically, the point was you firmly placed German tanks in their role as sniping medium tanks. Because as it was before this patch, German tanks kind of muddied. They were basically in the same boat as British mediums. The only difference between British mediums and German mediums was that the British mediums brought gun depression to the table. This was to make the German mediums. I would argue a skilled player could take a German medium and go up front and fight against players and be aggressive and fight alongside the Soviet and American medium tanks. And that was because they had armor. The British mediums, on average, just didn't have the armor that the German mediums had. And basically, with removing the top engines and giving them better track traverse, better gun handling, they influenced players to play in a more sit back and snipe kind of role, just like British mediums, except these tanks did it with more armor. That was their niche. They kind of were meant to compete against the British mediums. Well, they tried that here on console. The difference is they just took away the top engines. They didn't give us the gun handling buffs. They didn't give us terrain resistance buffs or suspension buffs. They didn't give us none of that shit. We had a straight nerf. We didn't get the buffs to offset it, and thus it wasn't a rebalance. It was a straight nerf. Now I can say as a super tester, at this point in time, Wargaming was certainly looking to bring those buffs into the game and thus make it into a true rebalance, and everything would have been fine. But for whatever reason, Wargaming scrapped that plan. And they decided just to go ahead and give everyone back their top engines. Well, they did that, and to some degree it worked out. But they screwed it up in the end, even when they tried to fix things. As a result, at Tier 6 and Tier 7, you have a situation where the E50... not the E50, but the Panther II. Panther II's top engine, its 870 horsepower engine, which you also see on the Jag Panther II, it ended up on the VK30-01D, it ended up on the VK30M, it ended up on the Panther I even, and going by memory here, I'm pretty sure it was on the Jag Panther as well. As a result, you had German medium tanks scooting around at Tier 6 and 7 with a Tier 8 engine that allowed them to flank even more aggressively than they could before. Before, I was more lax with my German mediums at Tier 6 and 7. But now, because I have an 800 horsepower engine, I can play a lot more aggressively than I did before. Even way more before, because I have an 800 horsepower engine. Why the hell not? Shouldn't I not take advantage of an 800 horsepower engine? So basically, you have a situation where you have tanks that are kind of fighting in the same arena as Soviet and American tanks. I'm able to actually take a Panther I and compete against Soviet and American tanks in situations that I shouldn't be involved in. With a Panther I, I'm supposed to be sniping. I'm supposed to be working my way into the fighting, not up front fighting from the very get-go or from the very beginning. And because I have an 800 horsepower engine, I can accelerate around and do all of those things. Admittedly, this doesn't break the balance of all the tanks. I mean, we're not talking Tier 10 here, obviously. but we are talking about the balance being muddy. We're talking about the waters just not being as clear-cut as they used to be. And there isn't as much variety in that playstyle, other than one tank brings a little bit more armor to the table than the other. And the other tank, in the case of a German tank, has an 800 horsepower engine and gets right up in your goddamn face as a result. And you also have a situation, and this was another obvious situation that needs to be looked at, because this balance didn't quite go through as planned, and they reverted back to the old balance, or the old patch notes, with some fuck-ups in between with the German engines getting messed up. You also have a situation where some tanks are now underperforming and overperforming. An example being the Panther II. If you were to take a Tiger I and a Panther II, and if you were to put a player out there and tell them you're going to be supported, you have a choice between one of these two tanks supporting you, and they're going to be in an ideal situation where they can keep that gun singing, they're going to be putting lead down range, they're not going to get any return fire. In other words, these guys are going to be able to cover you with impunity, and they're going to be able to lay down fire with impunity with no return fire whatsoever. Most are going to look at the Tiger I, because the vanilla Panther II that we have in this game is flat out just outclassed. The Tiger I can put its 88mm gun to better use than the Panther II. If you don't believe me, go to the World of Tanks Xbox wiki, look at the numbers, compare the Tiger I's gun to the Panther II, and you'll see my point. Now, in all fairness, yeah, the Panther II isn't completely outclassed by a Tiger I. It does arguably have better armor, it's sloped, it's angled, it's going to make better use of it, and it does have a higher top speed than the Tiger I. However, in that situation I pointed out, the Tiger I is flat out better, because that is the role the Panther II is supposed to fill. The Panther II is meant to be a Tier 8 German medium tank that fills that role that the Tiger I had at a Tier 7 heavy. It's kind of like a supporting... It's more like a supporting DPMing sniper with some armor. It was supposed to compete in that role, but as a result, Tiger I is just flat out better in that role. Other than its armor being more effective than the Tiger, and it having a higher top speed, those are the only advantages the Panther II really has. And as a result, Panther II is just underperforming. It is just not as capable as a Tiger I. Another example of a tank overperforming because of a lack of oversight and proper balance would be the E50. And the E50 is my favorite tank in the game. I absolutely love it. I enjoy playing the damn thing. I've played it more than other tanks in this game. However, I can acknowledge it is overperforming. It has a 1200 horsepower engine, and it has the same gun handling buffs as the E50 on the PC. So as a result, you have a German tank that can get up and do many of the same things an M46 Patton or a T54 can do. Now, it's obviously going to have a certain set of advantages and disadvantages. That's true for any tank in this game. That's normal. My point is you have the E50 competing in a role that it doesn't deserve to be in. It can compete against T-54s and M46 Pattons as a general purpose, get it done kind of tank that can scrap and do it all. Meanwhile, because of its accuracy and gun handling buffs and DPM, it can also compete against the Centurion 7-1 as a sniper. This basically makes the role of an M46 Patton less important as an alternative to the T-54. This also kind of shits and pisses in the same department as the T-54, because the T-54 now has to look over its shoulders at an E-50 that very well could ram it, and if it rams it, it also is going to have a competent enough DPM to tear it apart in a brawl. So, my point is what I'm trying to get out here, when I'm talking about German tanks, I'm not saying they're overpowered or even underpowered. I'm just saying they have a lack of a defined role. Their role changes from tier to tier. You can make that argument for any tank in this game, but it is more evident with German tanks now, thanks to Wargaming's half-ass balance and patches throughout this game. In all fairness, there was a time when Wargaming was pretty good about shit. But I would argue it went all downhill when they tried to fix things from patch 1.31 to patch 1.32. That was when we had this attempted German tank rebalance. and they went to give us back the old engines. Instead, they ended up giving different engines to different German medium tanks, for example. Like I was talking about with the VK3001D, ended up with an 800 horsepower engine, which it had no business having equipped to begin with. So you ended up with situations where tanks were competing. You had German tanks competing against tanks they had no business competing against. German mediums were meant to be competing against British mediums as area kind of dominant snipers with DPM and armor, as opposed to the British mediums, which had very high penetration, accurate guns with gun depression, but they didn't have quite the armor, and they didn't have quite the DPM, obviously. And you end up with situations where you have the E50 that it can do almost everything. It can compete against E54s. It can compete against the M46. And it can snipe against a Centurion just fine. This also ties in to what we're experiencing at Tier 10 with Tier 10 TDs. And I've gone on about Tier 10 TDs at length before, and I'm not going to really touch on it because I've done it so many times it's not even funny. However, we also have this issue where Wargaming is avoiding doing balance because they've seen how pissed off people got over the attempted German tank rebalance. Not that it wasn't wrong. Rebalances are not, there's nothing wrong with them. To give you an example, players are, yes, naturally pissed off when a rebalance happens. Players don't like change. However, in a game like Battlefield 4, they rebalanced high rate of fire weapons to the point where you didn't use them in all situations. They were purely used as close quarters weapons. Meanwhile, low rate of fire weapons could be used at medium to longer range engagements. Thus, there was a proper rebalance. So, the more time passed between that patch or that rebalance in that game, the more players were willing to accept it and tolerate it. And eventually, more and more players liked the rebalance, and it made sense. On console, I think that's probably what could have happened. But Wargaming got scared, and they've refused to do a proper rebalance since. That's why Tier 10 TDs kind of run roughshod over everyone, and they've gotten away with it since then, because Wargaming is afraid to do any of the necessary balance changes they need to make this game fine. Alright guys, I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.